Good afternoon, folks.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Russell.
Melissa, just so you know, we did have notice Leah Bergman wants to make public comments, so I think we're going to go ahead and allow it.
Sounds good. Yes, I saw the email and then I saw Colin's response as well. So perfect.
Got it. Okay.
Thank you.
Hello, everyone.
I feel like we should say welcome back, Angela.
Hey, Ricky. How are you, sweetie? Haven't seen you in a long time. Hey, Sheldon. How you doing today, Russ? How you doing today, Russ?
Pretty good, ma'am.
Ooh, don't say ma'am. My bones is aching today.
It's a little chilly.
It is.
Yeah, I'm getting tired of overcast. I feel like if it's going to be overcast, it needs to be snowy too, because then at least we get the light off the snow.
I don't know about that. You know, that's a whole nother set of problems.
True.
The snow,
I can't get my.
whole nother set.
Why is my? Oh, that's why it's not working. Okay. Give me a minute. What if I can do this? Hold on. Turn my mic off.
So folks, we are at 3 o'clock, but I think, Melissa, we've got a little ways to go to reach quorum. Is that correct?
That's correct. I'm keeping track. I'll make sure that I message you as soon as we need it.
Okay. So we'll just give ourselves a minute or two to see where we get. We only really have one official piece that will need a vote, which is the minutes. We've got to catch up from September, October, and November, but we'll give ourselves a moment here. Just a reminder, folks, as we're joining, we're waiting to reach quorum for just a moment. If you've not yet registered your attendance, you'll see in the chat a reminder from Melissa to do so. If you'll do that, that is a huge help, particularly when it comes time to put together the minutes of who was here and who was not. So if you'll take time to do that, that'll be a big help to us. Melissa and Colin, is it okay if we go ahead and get started and then, because there's only one piece that requires a vote, and then once we reach quorum, we can handle that vote?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Let me say welcome this afternoon to the meeting of the Homeless Services Advisory Committee. This is also called as a full COC meeting. I am Russ Pierce. I serve as Executive Director of Housing for New Hope. I am your Secretary of the HSAC. And by default, because our Vice Chair moved out of jurisdiction and the Chair is unable to be with us today, I'm going to be acting as the Chair for this meeting. So I do beg your patience, my first time through this, and we'll just see where we get. Let's start with our goals, just to keep that ever before us. They are to finish the job of ending chronic homelessness, prevent and end veterans homelessness, prevent and end homelessness for families, youth, and children, and to set a path to ending all types of homelessness. We're delighted today to welcome two new members to the HSAC. Jason Brenner is with us from the Durham Housing Authority. That's an important connection and partnership with us. I can see, Jason, good to have you with us. That seat's been open for an extended period, and so we are going to seem overly eager to have you with us, but we're very glad to have you here with us, Jason, and look forward to partnering and doing our best to kind of get you up and running on how pieces work. Also want to say a welcome back to Angela Holmes, who is an appointment from the Durham County Commissioners as a person with lived experience. And so, Angela, we're delighted to have you with us today and back in this group. So I think there'll be times when we need some historic perspective, and Angela will be able to give that for us as we continue to move forward. We do have one person wishing to bring public comment today. Leah Bergman would like to do that, and I believe Leah is joining us on the phone, not on video. Leah, are you able to hear us, and are you connected? If you're speaking, Leah, we cannot hear you. Okay, Leo, just one more time. Are you able to hear us? Okay. I am not hearing Leah, so I'm going to continue to move forward, and if we're able to connect, we may circle back for that later. The one piece where we do need to vote is actually on the minutes. So you should have received September, October, and November minutes. I appreciate your patience as I got in a groove and a system pulling those together. Melissa, am I correct? We are still not at quorum for the HSAC?
That's correct.
Okay. I am going to ask, though, are there any corrections that need to be made to what's there? We can note that, and then later, again, if we have quorum, we'll be able to go ahead and approve those. Any corrections that we need to make September, October, or November?
Hey Russ, this is Eliza.
Yes, ma'am.
In the the October minutes, I was present and I'm just not listed anywhere there. So if
Okay.
yeah, that'd be great. Thank you.
And you said that was October.
Yes, October.
Thank you. Any others? Okay, good. We'll hold those. Again, I appreciate your patience. We're still trying to work through making sure we're capturing every category that everybody's in as best we can. And so we'll continue to work forward to doing that. We'll turn next to Jonathan Crooms for our quarterly performance management report. And Jonathan serves as the chair of that committee. Jonathan?
Thanks, Russell. Good afternoon, everyone. Jonathan Crooms with Durham County Veterans Services and current Performance Management Subcommittee Chair. Great to be with you all this afternoon, and I'm just going to provide a brief update on what we have been up to the past couple months. And essentially, I have 3 updates for the HSAC and for the larger COC. The first thing that we have been working on is to evaluate our old 2022 COC permanent housing project scorecard and make adjustments and adopt a new one for the 2023 evaluation that is going to be upcoming here soon. We've made some changes to the scorecard that we've adopted for the new year. The first thing that we have done is we have added some questions to better measure the vulnerability of the clients that projects are enrolling. Specifically, we have added a question about the number of clients who enter a project with a mental health or substance abuse disorder. Our previous scorecards have asked a general question about the number of disabling conditions clients enter the project with. And so we've made a more specific question to address that. Certainly, there are many things that make our homeless clients very vulnerable, but as we all know, mental health disabilities and substance abuse disorders can certainly really make those clients some of the most vulnerable to house. The other thing that we have added as well is a question measuring the percentage increase of clients from entry to exit who leave with non-cash benefits, such as food stamps. So several of the projects that we have benchmarks for, several of the project benchmarks have a benchmark score for non-cash and mainstream benefits. And so what we've done with this question is allow projects to gain some extra points by showing an increase in the percentage of folks who leave with those benefits. The last change that we have made, and the most significant one, is that we have removed component 5 of the scorecard, which is the housing first assessment. This was the most subjective part of the scorecard. And the reason that we have removed it is actually because of my second update that I'm going to give here in a moment. But before I get into that, the big thing that will change with this scorecard for the new year is that it's going to be a little more objective, since that component is not in there anymore. The second update that I'm going to give has to do with the housing first assessment. So even though it's not going to be in the 2023 renewal project scorecard, we as a COC are participating in a cross COC Housing First review. We are partnering with the Wake and Orange County COCs to form teams to go into each other's COCs and do Housing First evaluations of some of the COC projects there. And so the whole idea behind this is to have a fresh set of eyes, take a look outside of our COC at how we're doing, and as well to learn about some of the things our partner COCs are doing. And so we have several teams that are formed here from the Durham COC, and they will go into either Wake or Orange County COC to do their site visits. There's going to be formal training for this, which is taking place on January 3rd and 5th, and it is administered by HUD-TA, which is the Technical Assistance Office of HUD. And essentially what the teams are going to be prepared to do is on their site visits to look at, do the projects say that they're doing Housing First? Do they document that they're doing it? And then are they actually implementing Housing First principles? We've decided not to incorporate this evaluation as part of the scoring process because this is the first year we've ever done that. We don't quite know what the feedback will be that we'll get. So we've decided just to let this be a standalone evaluation for this year. The last update I want to give us on behalf of the Performance Management Subcommittee is that the committee voted back in October to begin collecting and reviewing project data on a semi-annual basis for all HMIS projects in the COC. Over the past 1 to 2 years, we have been having conversations off and on about how we as a subcommittee can monitor the performance of the system outside of any funding process. Those funding process evaluations have, typically kind of been the focus point because they take a lot of energy. Plus, without funding, it's hard to house folks. And so we have been looking for a way to better do our what we're tasked with doing, which is to monitor the overall performance outside of any sort of funding process. And so what is going to happen is that HMIS projects in the COC are being asked to provide data, which is going to be measured up against the benchmarks for their particular project, whether it's rapid rehousing, emergency shelter, permanent supportive housing. And we're going to look at this on a semi-annual basis. On November 22nd, Lloyd Schmeidler and Melissa Hernandez from the Community Development Department hosted an orientation for projects so they could see how the data submitting process is going to work with the new Smart Sheet. We do have a plan to make this data publicly available, but we have not worked out the details yet on that. So that is something we'll work on and communicate back to the HSAC and COC when we've come to a decision on how we're going to best do that. And we expect to do our first data collection sometime in January in 2023. So those are the 3 updates I have for HSAC today, and I'd be delighted to answer any questions that anyone might have.
Anyone have any questions for Jonathan?
So I did have some questions, but I think Ricky is attempting to answer my questions. And I think Ricky's on performance management, right?
So Ricky's time with performance management is over, unfortunately. So her COC liaisonship ended.
Oh, okay. So you saying like a review of a review. So my first question was, are they reviewing just like the person in HMIS? Like, or are they reviewing just like performance standards and things like that solely? Or like what kind of inter-county, like what does the review entail? What does it look like? Just trying to get an understanding of what's going to happen.
Are you talking about the Housing First cross COC evaluation, or are you talking more about
that one, the cross COC evaluation?
Okay, so the main thing is that they're going to be trying to answer those 3 questions that I mentioned. You know, do the projects say that they're doing housing first? Do they document that they're doing it? And then are they actually doing it? So that is as much information as I have at this time. If Lloyd is on the call with us, he may have some additional information, I think, that may be able to fill in the gaps there.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Jonathan. I'm happy to provide a little more information. The basic tool that we're using for this evaluation process is a document called the Housing First Evaluation Tool that HUD released in 2017. I believe it was drafted by the Corporation for Supportive Housing and supported by HUD. The plan is to review the policies and procedures of the individual projects, to consider how well the policies and procedures document Housing First standards and principles, then to do site visits during which the three or four person evaluation team would interview project staff to get a sense for how well the staff say that they are implementing Housing First, how familiar they are with Housing First standards and principles and ideas. And then hopefully the third step would be either through a focus group or potentially through some phone interviews with project participants that are referred to the evaluation team by the project to do some interviews with project participants to get a sense for how well the project is using Housing First ideas with the actual project participants. So those would be the primary steps. Part of the documentation also can include a review of the project's assessment tools. So that's what we are working towards.
Thank you, Lloyd.
You're welcome.
Any other question for Jonathan? Okay. Jonathan, thank you for the update and for the continued good work of the team. I know there's always quite a lot happening and a lot to take on, and I understand you still have openings if people would like to serve with you all.
We do. We're like the military and we're always recruiting.
There you go. There you go. We'll continue to work on that. If we can, we have reached quorum. So if we could go back for just a moment to the minutes. We have received the September, October, and November minutes with a correction to the October minutes. I would entertain a motion to approve the minutes for those 3 months if someone would like to make such a motion.
So moved. This is Colleen.
Colleen, thank you. And do we have a second?
This is Jonathan Crooms. I second that motion.
Thank you. And if you're a member of the HSAC and you would approve this or turn it down, if you would just put your yes or no in the chat, we will record that. Thank you very much. Very good. Glad to have us caught up. And again, I appreciate your patience as we did that. I'm going to just check one more quick time. Leah was messaging a few of us on the side. I think she was having an issue connecting by phone. She was trying to see if she would be able to connect live on Zoom. Leah, are you with us now?
I am. If you can hear me, I can hear you.
We can hear you. So we're going to give that space for public comment. And if somebody correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe it's 3 minutes.
Super. Well, thank you all. Nice to see some familiar faces. Leah Bergman here, housing provider in Durham, have been involved in trying to house folks for a good number of years now. Just wanted you all as a community to strongly encourage using some upcoming funds available to build some permanent supportive housing units here in Durham. Over this last several years, We've tried to do things differently. I think maybe focusing on a housing first model. And unfortunately, in my experience, I've seen a lot of failed sustainable housing situations and folks living back out in the woods or in the streets. I do believe there are other communities that are doing it differently, doing it better. I would strongly encourage you all to look at Mecklenburg County. And those are the comments that I would like to lead with. I think we're also, unfortunately, have started to isolate some of the housing providers that historically have been engaged in this discussion. So if anybody has any specific questions for me, be happy to address this.
Thank you, Leah, for taking time to share those comments today. And we'll keep those in mind as we continue to work forward on how we'll be using some of these different funds.
You're welcome.
Okay, we're going to shift now to, and I'm going to need some help on this one, possibly from Melissa and Colin, for a full HSAC picture, which when I first read that, you may have done the same thing. I thought, oh, we're going to describe how HSAC works. But no, it's literally a picture. And we are trying to figure out how to get that, I believe, for some of the websites. I believe the clerk has requested that. Colin, can you fill us in a little bit what we're trying to accomplish?
I think Melissa can fill in the why, but essentially the clerk has asked for a picture of all the HSAC members. And since we don't really have in-person meetings to try and get, 20 plus people in a room together to get a picture, the options that came back were we could get the HSAC and try and do a Zoom picture. It kind of reminds me of like the Muppet Show with everybody in their little heads, but we could do that, or we could, Melissa suggested doing a collage she would be willing to do if everybody had like a headshot picture, kind of what we have on the website, on our current COC website. We could take those pictures, and Melissa said she could combine them that way. So it was just really which direction do the HSAC members want to go? Do we want to try and do a screenshot of people on Zoom windows, or Melissa to do a little quick collage for this? And Melissa, please fill in any gaps that I'm missing.
That sounds good. So it sounds like they want a picture like actively in a meeting. I did get clarification. So they do want a picture while you guys are actually meeting. So we had suggested maybe the January meeting, since we don't necessarily have everyone here, so we can give everyone a heads up that we would like everyone to have their cameras on for a quick picture during the January HSAC meeting.
And does it matter at all for their purposes, the difference between HSAC members, community members, COC members?
Great question. I think they definitely want all of the HSAC members, or at least the majority of us, all on. They did not specify whether or not community members could be in the picture. But I think I did suggest to Colin that if you guys would like it to just be HSAC, just so you guys can have a picture as well with the rest of the board, I can, put all of our board members into a quick breakout room so that it's just all of you guys together for the picture.
Okay, great. Any thoughts or questions on this? Preferences? Would folks be comfortable with us doing this together in the January meeting? We'll probably schedule it sometime 15 minutes in, so we have as many people here as possible, being realistic. And we'd have cameras on for the HSAC members. That work for folks? Okay, I'm seeing nodding heads. So let's plan for that oh, sorry, let me ask another question. Bear with me. Colin, this says HSAC approval needed. Do we need like an official motion to get our pictures taken?
I don't think we need an official motion on it. It was more of a note for us to make sure that there's a plan in place, rather than hey, just informational, we want to take a picture. It's like we needed to land on here's how we're going to do it and when we're going to do it. You're good.
Okay. So 15 minutes into the meeting or so, at the January HSAC meeting, we'll take a photo on Zoom with the HSAC members. So Melissa, if you'll just, of course, remember to remind us in advance so we can dress however we believe is appropriate for the picture. So that'd be great. Good. Okay, let's shift then to number 6, which is going to be the bulk of our meeting today, which is the home ARP presentation and request for input. Of course, it was shared last month that we'd be focusing on this very heavily because there has been a shift in the timeline expectations from HUD. So we are now needing to move at a different pace than we were originally intending. And so I'm going to turn it over to Colin to walk us through today, and we'll have a chance for feedback and questions as we go.
Thank you, Russ. I will share my screen. We'll kind of walk through our PowerPoint presentation. It's a slightly different version of what we shared last month. Essentially, all the information is the same. There's a few little tweaks, some data points. You've seen that the PowerPoint I'm getting ready to share is the same PowerPoint that was emailed to the HSAC and COC on Friday. So if you have it in front of you, if you have notes, you're welcome to look at it. Otherwise, we'll just do a quick run through of it for folks who have not been able to look at it, and then we'll open it up for discussion. All right, so as Russ said, we have to go through a process to accept our home ARP funds. And a lot of this includes gaining information and insight from our COC members and specific organizations within the community. So this is what we're attempting to start today. And this sort of is our background here, that these are really intended to serve families and individuals who are homeless, at risk of homelessness, and or other vulnerable populations. So attempting to flee domestic violence would fit into that category. And about $4.3 million. And these funds must be fully spent by September 30th, 2030. We do have a deadline to get them into contract, which is prior to that. So however we use these funds, they all need to be gone by that 2030 date. And that $4.3 million does include some administrative fees to help move all these pieces along. Funds may be used for the acquisition, rehabilitation, or new construction of rental housing, including single room occupancies. That's that SRO if you're not familiar with that acronym. Permanent supportive housing and affordable rental housing. The funds could also be used for acquisition and development of non-congregate shelter units. Funds could be used for supportive services, including the McKinney-Vento supportive services, homelessness prevention services, and housing counseling services. The funds could also be used for tenant-based rental assistance. We do have to make sure that whatever we use these funds for, the beneficiaries of whatever these funds are used for fit into this category, into these categories that are considered, HUD calls them the qualifying populations. So these are literally homeless, individuals and families at risk of homelessness, individuals and families who are fleeing or attempting to flee domestic violence, or other populations which would prevent homelessness or reduce housing instability. To access the funds, we have to go through the public participation, and you as the COC and HSAC are key members. And some of you on this call, I'm thinking DSS, DHA specifically off the top of my head, are specific entities that we have to speak to directly as well. So we're able to sort of hear everybody kind of in the same place. There may be some follow-ups with some of the targeted groups that we need to talk to as well. Victim Service Provider is another organization that is specifically called out that we need to talk to. We do have to do an assessment of gaps in the housing and shelter inventory. And we did do a simple gap analysis based on the template that HUD provided to sort of help get this, a frame of reference put into the scope so that we could share that with you to help guide discussion and try and hear your thoughts on how to best use these funds. If we're going to use the home ARP funds, we do need to include any preferences. If we're what that means is within those qualifying populations, if we were targeting it to chronically homeless, we would need to say that would be the preference. Or we would need to say, well, it's chronically homeless, but chronically homeless who are considered elderly and fixed income or something, or specifically targeted for survivors of intimate partner violence. I'm not saying that's the direction we need to go. I'm just saying that's the examples of how you would target your preferences in that category. So here we go to get into a little bit of data. According to our point in time count, we had 144 persons who were unsheltered. 21% of those were families. 21% of the 459 persons were made up of families. 79% were single adults. You can see the race and gender breakdown. We had 144, I think this was supposed to be 100. Yeah. Chronically homeless, 65 of those chronically homeless were unsheltered, and we had 89 in emergency shelter. Currently, this is as of last week, there were 24 families and 101 individuals that were self-reporting that they were unsheltered. According to the most recent community survey data, there were 8,255 renter households with incomes below 30% AMI who are rent burdened. And currently we've got 25 families and 31 individuals who are at risk of homelessness within 14 days by self-report. So that doesn't mean that we have verification that there's a pending eviction. This could be families stating you need to be out of the house within 14 days. Based on data from Durham Crisis Response Center, we have approximately 500 persons fleeing DV, intimate partner violence annually. And one of the other needs that we've noticed is we've got a reduction in properties willing to accept high barrier households exiting homelessness. And we can also add to that willing to accept third-party payments. So that's also a bigger need. Looking at our current resources and gaps, these are based on our report to HUD from our 2022. We have 97 shelter beds for families and 172 shelter beds across all of our emergency supportive. This includes SSVF emergency shelter beds. So not all of these fit specifically homeless that the COC works, because the veterans have their own sets of things, but that data gets counted in with our data for reporting. So as you can see, if we've got this many beds, we do have a deficit because we've got 125 households that are currently unsheltered. 357 beds available for permanent supportive housing. And some of that 357 does include units owned and operated by CASA and DHA and Volunteers of America that have longstanding persons in those programs, but may not have the same, are not paid for out of COC funds. So that 357 does include that. So even when you include all those PSH beds, we still have 154, 144 homeless persons who are chronically homeless that could use permanent or qualify for permanent supportive housing. Rapid rehousing, we have 182 beds that were available and used during the 22 pound. That number increases and decreases based on the level of need of people in those units. So out of those 182 beds, I believe when I looked at some end of the year data, almost 100 of those beds remain when it goes to the next calendar year. So we've got a lot of long stayers in the rapid rehousing program based on prioritizations that had been put in place that folks need long-term supportive services and long-term financial assistance, but there isn't necessarily a path to exit rapid rehousing to permanent supportive housing, or enough vouchers to help cover folks. And unfortunately, rents jumped higher than people were able to increase their income over the last couple of years. The home allocation, we need to use these funds to address priorities identified. So that's what that data was helping us to say, hey, here's some of the needs. Now it's up to us to kind of say, what's the priority? The home ARP funds, these are one-time funds. So using this for something like tenant-based rental assistance may be a challenge, because come 2031, anybody that's receiving a housing voucher out of these funds, that funding would dry up, and we would need to make sure there was something in place to continue that funding. The funds must be used in the city of Durham. And depending on the scale of activity, we may need to combine these ARP funds with other funding sources. And that's something that we need to look into how we do it. And we would have to have some policies, but that's not something that this group has to worry about. That's something the community development department would work on, what's called a subsidy layering policy, to ensure that we can maximize these. So the discussion is, how should the city prioritize these funds? And I'll ask, because we have to take notes, if you would like to comment and talk about it, please identify who you are and what agency you represent, so that we can just accurately reflect, thoughts that were shared, and make sure that we can document participation by the community as we go forward. So with that, I will turn it back over to you, Chair Russ.
Sharita has her hand up with a question. Sharita?
So I put the question in the chat before you gave us the protocol, Colin. I'm sorry. So my question was, could the home ARP funds be used to extend rapid rehousing persons whose funding is ending?
So ending like right now? No.
No, but like
But
that would end because we already foresee that there's going to be a problem. Could it be used to extend it at least to the 24 months? Is that how many months a rapid rehousing can pay?
It would go to 24 months is what rapid rehousing could pay. You could potentially use these funds to convert to it would basically turn into an HCV, and that HCV would just continue it out till no further than 2030.
Oh, so that would just be a temporary solution.
Mhm.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah. What a great question.
Yep. And Sharita, could you just identify your agency for us, just for new folks and for the record?
I'm sorry, Lincoln Community Health Center, but also Concerned Citizen and Dermite my whole entire life.
Thank you, ma'am. Recognize Sheldon.
So Sheldon, Urban Ministries of Durham. Colin, I know you mentioned about a deadline to contract. What is the deadline to contract?
I need to go back and look in the regulations. I want to, for some reason, 2026 is sticking in my mind, that the contract must be in place.
Okay.
And then all the funds would need to be expended, but I need to just go back and double check that 2026, but that's, for some reason, that's the number that's sticking in my head.
Okay. And if you have a project that's going on, maybe the total project isn't finished, but the funds are spent, that would be okay?
Potentially, as long as potentially.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I think it would sort of depend on the project, what it was. You get into the building piece, and were the funds allocated spent on eligible expenses? Can it be verified that the work was done and the funds drawn? So potentially yes. It's just making sure we can line it all up.
Okay. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Sheldon. Tracy Stondino.
Hi, just had a quick question. I'm just trying to gather more clarification around the fact I think last year, the emergency housing vouchers and the mainstream vouchers were released across the state, and I think Durham did receive an allocation of those. How are those being prioritized in comparison to how the home RAP funds would be allocated to address housing needs?
So the emergency housing vouchers, we did get 68 of those issued to Durham. At one point, I think all but 3 of them had been issued. And a lot of those have started being returned back to us because people didn't understand them, don't want them, moved out of the area. So we currently have roughly 12 of the 68 that we can still issue. And we are going through the reprioritization process. The vouchers had been going to chronically homeless, hardest to serve. And a lot of those didn't necessarily have money to ensure that they could continue paying the water bill and other necessary expenses. So we've been looking at a new prioritization of going through trying to move people on from permanent supportive housing and or rapid rehousing. If there's nobody in permanent supportive housing ready to move on, people in rapid rehousing who are ready to move on, but need that ongoing financial support, but do not need ongoing supportive services. So we're trying to, because these EHVs do not come with any supportive services dollars. So we're trying to make sure that people who are getting in there are really ready, are able to be self-sufficient. And we don't want to burn bridges with our property managers and housing providers in the community who lease to our people and participants in our programs.
Ricky Gardner from Housing for New Hope asked a question in the meeting chat. What is the match requirement?
I would have to go back and double check, Ricky. Off the top of my head, I don't think there's a match. Karen, do you remember?
That's correct. I don't believe there's a match.
Okay, thank you. Sharita, do you have your hand back up?
I do. I'm sorry.
You're fine.
This is kind of a twofold question. So earlier in our meeting, in our public comment, we heard one of our community housing providers advocate for us to allocate more PSH units. So we know that the PSH units are the most expensive housing option that we have in our array of housing options. And so the issue that comes to my mind, whereas I think, yes, we need more PSH, I also think the funds are going to dry up at some point. And so my question is about sustainability commitments beyond. So if we decided to fund more PSH, what would happen when the funds are gone? Would the PSH just go away?
So if you're talking about using the funds to develop, and that's what I think Leah was talking about, was developing PSH, that would be using these funds.
I see her nodding her head.
Yeah, using these funds as a one-time capital investment, as a construction cost. So you're correct, Sharita, there would need to be some sort of plan to ensure that either A, there's ongoing supportive services, and those supportive services could come out of COC competitive application funds. The city and county would have to talk and figure out if there were any dollars available to continue that, or depending on how and what the structure of a construction project looks like, you may be able to pull some income in from market rate rents to help offset some supportive services costs, depending on how you scaled the project. So there's a lot of ways that you could look at trying to fund that ongoing supportive services.
Thank you. I'd like to recognize Ryan Furman.
I think Leah's broadcasting from my house today. I did want to point out, and Colin, you covered this, but there's an interesting dynamic with the ARP funding in terms of qualifying populations. And my understanding is that we cannot disqualify or fail to consider any of those qualifying populations, but we can prioritize amongst the qualifying populations. One thing that I think is really important is that one of the qualifying populations are people at risk of homelessness. And I've always felt, and I think the numbers bear this out, that our homeless population are kind of the tip of the iceberg, and that when we start talking about folks at risk of homelessness, we're talking about potentially 10 times or more the number of folks that are either in our homeless services system or are unsheltered. So, I would strongly encourage the community to prioritize folks that are literally homeless, and to further consider whether there should be prioritization for folks that are chronically homeless if we feel like that's a priority or should be a priority for the community.
Thank you, Ryan. Other comments or questions? Sorry, I was muted, didn't realize it.
I will share, speaking with Janine Gordon earlier today, she, from the DSS standpoint, looking at elderly and those on fixed incomes, whether it be disability or Social Security, that are in that really, really low income due to those limited fixed income payments, and the difficulty of finding not just affordable housing in that price point, but also how housing designed with a universal mindset in mind for mobility challenged and able to age in place as far as you can, because obviously stepping into a high tub is sometimes difficult for folks and becomes a trip and fall hazard at different stages in life for different people. So that was a thought, that also remembering to not lose sight of that very, very low AMI group, which is intersects a lot with our neighbors who are experiencing homelessness in Durham.
Ricky Gardner from H&H has another comment in the chat. Another question: would a project serving high system utilizers be considered, meaning people who use emergency rooms and jails as temporary housing solution?
Well, keep in mind, you've got projects are limited to TBRA, the tenant-based rental assistance, expanding non-congregate shelter or permanent housing. So in theory, as long as those people who are high utilizers of those systems, as long as they meet the qualifying populations, you could definitely work that into it in terms of not necessarily prioritizing somebody who intersects with all of those, but the characteristics of that may fall into one of those qualifying populations and be part of the prioritization process. And then further breaking it out in an acceptance policy or how you move people through there. Somebody who intersects with emergency rooms, jails, and shelter might score higher and be prioritized above somebody who's only uses the emergency room all the time. Does that make sense?
And Ryan has a comment too in the meeting chat. A chronic priority would align well with any project designed for high utilizers, maybe SRO with a plan for services.
Mm-hmm.
I hope this is appropriate, but Ryan, I'm just curious, are there communities that are further along in this process that are good models for us to be looking at? I mean, from your perspective, from DCH, or have good insights that we should consider?
Yeah, so, North Carolina Housing Finance Agency has submitted their plan to HUD, and I believe that they got HUD approval in early November. That, would be public record on their website. We did provide public comment, and we hosted several of the, focus groups to try to get feedback. I do think that, their focus is on non-entitlement communities, which is kind of a fancy way of saying the rural regions that aren't getting, direct allocations, which, have some different needs than what we see in Durham. Part of me does wonder, if HMIS or data could help show where we have existing gaps or where we just don't have the capacity that we need based on current demand for services and or projected demand for services, since this is a growing community. But the one that could be a good example is NCHFA. Many communities had been dragging their feet on these conversations and really haven't been active around engaging their COCs and other stakeholders. So there aren't a whole lot of folks that are well in front of us in this process.
Okay, thank you. I'll just also note Ryan Smith, the Director of Community Safety, has a comment, and I'm reading these for folks that are on the phone and maybe not able to see them. The community safety heart responders are meeting neighbors who need permanent supportive housing and who are in and out of our jails dozens of times over a year. We talk a lot about the need for more of this in Durham to support some of our neighbors who have the most complex needs. We also are encountering neighbors on white flag nights who need shelter. Thank you, appreciate that, Ryan. Yeah. Street also commented here, unfortunately, our data is only as good as what we collect. We have a lot of gaps there. One question, I don't know if this is for Sharita or for Colin. There have been studies done previously, I'm going to say in the last 3 years. One focused on PSH is one that comes to mind just because that keeps coming up. Are we able to draw on the data from those and the insights that the people who did the projects offered, or that sounds like a strange question, or do we have to kind of like start new in terms of data?
I think we can look at that data. I mean, we've in the presentation that I sent you, there's a rough order of magnitude that, we've got 357 beds for PSH, and we have 154 people between unsheltered homeless and in shelter who qualify for PSH and need PSH. So you definitely have a gap right there, right off the bat. If you've got 154 people in the homeless continuum, which is, well, I'm not looking at the number. Let me get the right number. But if we're talking 154 people out of a pit count of 459 people, that's a pretty high percentage of that group. I mean, that's a little over 25%.
And I believe that does track with
33%.
I remember the report having something like, we suggested that we needed a bare minimum of 125 PSH placements. But I think it went all the way up as high as 800. But it definitely was at least at 125.
It did. So I think looking at this, 33% of our point in time count qualified as chronically homeless. The other thing that's interesting, when I was looking at some of our system data, and Lloyd, you may have to jump in and correct me if I'm wrong, 60%, I might be getting it backwards. So Lloyd, correct me if I'm wrong on this. I don't have the data in front of me. 60% of our the homeless system utilizers were new, first-time homeless. And like 40% are long or have been in and out at some points, but not necessarily high recidivism in a 2-year period. And I may have that backwards, but Lloyd, chime in if you remember that number.
No, I think that's about right.
Sheldon, I think I saw your hand up earlier, but I missed you.
Thank you. I just wanted to comment in terms of like some of the funds being utilized as we look at some of the capital development of capital projects. I know we talked about supportive housing. I know we have needs as we talk about and grapple with white flag from year to year and appropriate space and facilities for that. We know that we have Durham crisis response that has needs from a facility standpoint. And then on our side, we look at singles and families, non-congregate shelter, upgrades and development that's needed, really kind of across our whole spectrum and system. So, I would be pushing for, some type of project that's going to help address those things from a capital and a development standpoint.
Just catching back on 2 comments in the chat. First from Sharita. As a healthcare provider, I think our chronic numbers will continue to grow. Lots of very sick people come to Durham because of our abundance of resources. Ryan adds, it's also important to remember that if we prioritize additional shelter capacity, we need corresponding resources on an ongoing basis to get the folks housed, or else they'll sit in shelter and
Length of time homeless.
length of time. Sorry, I thought I knew all my acronyms, Ryan. Length of time homeless goes up, up, up. Yep. Yep. Leah, I believe wanted to add a comment, and we'll allow that.
Yes, thank you so much. I've obviously been in, I think the way we've done things most significantly in the last couple of years is we've prioritized those folks. Excuse me for 1 minute.
We've all had that moment. We understand.
We prioritized folks, which, we've tried it a different way, right? Which was, we've tried housing first. We've tried it with folks that have been chronically homeless, getting them housed, see how that went. From my point of view, unfortunately, we failed at that. I think if you could look for developing more PSH units, there are studies out of Mecklenburg County that says that the costs go down when you do it more in that way. I think there's private funds available. Also, you can look for other partners. You can get some community money to fund, some county money potentially to fund the ongoing support services. And then I think you can re-engage some typical housing providers like myself, who unfortunately, because we've had to house some of the community's most challenging and have not had wonderful experiences doing so, I think you open up more than just the PSH units that you create right then and there, is what I'm getting at.
Colin, and maybe this is a Karen question too. So obviously we're having a conversation about home ARP, and a number of these conversations are the comments at the moment are talking more capital. $4 million is a lot in a way, but it only goes so far on a capital project. Do we have a sense of county's prioritization for some of its remaining ARP funds? And as a secondary, would they be open to the HSAC maybe suggesting or requesting that some of those funds be set aside for a project that could utilize both home ARP and some of their funding? Hope that question makes sense.
So the answer is the county has had some discussion with the city about wanting to channel some of its ARP funds into affordable housing. The biggest ARPA funds rather than home ARP. I think the biggest challenge in using ARPA funds is the spending deadline of ARPA funding. The spending deadline of ARPA funding is it's not quite the end of 2026. And that is a very tight timeline for a capital project. And just sort of laying it out, it's a very tight timeline for a capital project that isn't already kind of fairly well conceived and moving down the road. And just to kind of illustrate that for folks, if you were trying to do a new project and say you wanted to use tax credits, you would apply for tax credits, next January 24. You would be awarded tax credits, you hope, August 24. You would run like a lunatic to get under contract by June 25. And then you would be desperately trying to spend all your money by, I think it's November 26 or October 26, when you needed to have your ARPA dollars spent. So I think that's the big challenge with mixing ARP and ARPA. But I think we need to take a step back and say, leaving aside the specific source of funds, I think that there is a joint city-county project if it is something that we can, as a community, coalesce around. And it doesn't necessarily have to come out of ARPA. We'd still have to figure out where the money does come from. But I wouldn't necessarily let the timeframes of specific funding sources guide those decisions.
And if I'm asking too many questions, somebody like buzz me out. and maybe this is even a Ryan question. My understanding is NCHFA has PSH specific funds set aside that they are trying to find partners for. And so I guess Karen and Ryan, you may know if that's the case or not, but that's my understanding from recent conversation. Karen, do we see many LIHTC projects that have PSH, or is it usually different funding sources that, I should probably know this, but that are brought together for a project like that?
So the answer to that question depends on which state you're in. In North Carolina, we have not had a huge focus on PSH as a state. And so PSH has typically been done as smaller projects that have cobbled together. So in state funds, which are a limited pot of funds, philanthropic dollars, local dollars to do, 10 units, 20 units, something on a smaller scale. It is definitely possible to use the low-income housing tax credit and then layer on PSH for part of the units. And that is definitely a model that is being done elsewhere. It is not a model that is done a whole lot in North Carolina, and that just has to do with how we allocate tax credits. That may change if the federal government changes kind of what it's telling the state about prioritization of tax credits, crossing my fingers and hoping that there's going to be a change in tax credits to really prioritize serving lower income households. But so the answer is right now, the state program that exists is not meant to be married with tax credits. It is a separate program, and it's basically for smaller projects. If you want to use tax credits, you could build permanent supportive housing, but what you would need to bring to it to make it work would be gap financing, probably rental assistance like vouchers for the PSH units, and some source of services funding.
Okay, good. Thank you. And let me just catch back up on a couple of chat pieces, and the question about potentially combining. Commissioner Carter's response was absolutely. And for those who don't know, she serves on the county commissioners. Ryan Smith pointing out one more observation from responders from the Hearts team. In addition to permanent supportive housing, a very high priority there is an emergent need for more space and capacity that has minimal barriers to entry for people who need to survive on dangerously cold nights. A space that a person can enter intoxicated at midnight and not be turned away. The Heart team also notes the need for day center space where neighbors can wash clothes, receive mail, etc. Just thanks for letting us share observations from the field as first responders. We appreciate it, Ryan.
I will say on the emergency shelter piece, because I hear that's come up a few times, this is specifically for developing non-congregate shelter space.
Right.
So if you're looking at a drop-in place, that is typically going to be a congregate space rather than non-congregate. So you would have to look at additional funding for that, as well as additional funding sources for a day space. So just
a few of us have talked quite a bit. Let me just stop for folks, because I hear inside conversations at times people saying, a lot of stuff gets said in these meetings that I don't understand quite, and I don't know quite how to ask. It's a safe space. Like if you've heard something that you want to ask a question about, there are a number of people on here who can help explain or clarify. So let me make a space for others who may have questions or thoughts today. Okay. Well, we will continue to encourage that as best we can. Also getting a question here. Let's see, from Julia Gamble. Are there funds to guide strategic planning, something that could possibly guide us over the coming years? In the various sections, Colin, can you remind us, would that be an eligible activity?
With this pot of money, no.
Okay. So my memory is that there is a section on like strengthening nonprofits or capacity building for nonprofits, I think is the term, but that would be the individual ones, not a collective community aspect.
And that is more not like, it's more staffing up, not technical assist. It's more not a technical assistance consultant thing. That is more of a help to increase the staff capacity to meet the need in a short term. That's that service provision piece of capacity building. I mean, we we're looking at trying to bring in some long-term capacity building and technical assistance funds, but COVID and COVID extension contracts and things like that have sort of taken priority. And now this having to go through this exercise. I see the question from Shreed about medical respite funding. As long as the medical respite is to qualifying populations and it fits under a non-congregate shelter to be developed or acquired or permanent housing potentially. I think a medical respite would have to fall under that emergency shelter non-congregate category rather than a affordable housing opportunity. Just unless you're thinking permanent supportive housing is medical respite versus short-term acute care.
Mindful we're at 4:07. We have just 23 minutes left and a couple of other things to cover today. Any other questions from folks or Colin, other pieces that we need to, provide to you at this step of the process?
No, at this point, it's our job as the city, because we're the ones who are the recipients of it. We have to put together this plan and, synthesize all of the information that we hear and come up with a plan and explain, how we got there. It will also need to go to it also needs to go through city council and a public comment process there as well. So there's a few more steps that we need to go through on this. So this is our attempt to reach out to the COC. We've talked about after this meeting, other thoughts, discussions, please email us thoughts. We may look at sending out a survey of if you had to prioritize, what would this look like? Please fill out that survey. That will help, sort of help us create some hard data of rank orders that the group sees. So there's still some more pieces of it. And I see Shaisha for youth-specific funding. And could we do multiple projects? I guess the question is, if there's enough money and enough good projects, perhaps, but $4 million doesn't go all that far. We just have to make sure that whatever we do will be used wisely and make the biggest dent that we can, biggest bang for the buck, for lack of a better term.
Yeah, thank you. Well, thank you for engagement today. And again, as Colin said, any questions, feel free to filter to Colin and the team. And again, if there's pieces where you're still trying to get clarity on sort of some of it, you can reach out to any number of us. We're happy to help try and explain pieces alongside the work that the city does. So our next piece up is part of an outgrowth of trying to help people better understand the work that we're doing. And a number of us, I think, still have confusion about what HSAC is versus the COC and the lead agency piece. So we're going to take a few minutes to get a brief explanation of the various roles and responsibilities. And Colin is up again for this portion.
Yeah,
yes, just very quickly before I forget, a reminder from your friendly secretary and city staff, if you have not registered yet for the meeting, that reminder link is back in the chat again. It's very helpful. Sorry, go ahead, Colin.
Sure. This is just a very, very, very brief toenail, dipping a toe in the water to kind of, we've got a lot of change. We've had a lot of people come on to HSAC, leave HSAC, new COC members, new committee members, all these things. So we thought this would be a good opportunity just to kind of give a very, very, very high level overview of HSAC, COC, lead agency. How do you get involved? Very brief. We intend to do some more trainings and discussions around these things at future meetings. So just keep that in mind. This is just meant as a quick high level of a who's who and what's what. And let me find this presentation. One. And share my screen. There we go. All right. So at a very, very high level, what is our continuum of care, otherwise known as a COC? The COC itself is the collaboration of homeless service providers, housing providers, funders, and government agencies involved in addressing homelessness in Durham County. And HUD requires every jurisdiction to have one of these if we are going to receive HUD continuum of care funding. And then in order to have a continuum of care, you have to have kind of a governing board. And that governing board is our Homeless Services Advisory Committee. And that Homeless Services Advisory Committee was developed through the interlocal agreement between the city and the county back in 2012, if I remember correctly. Lloyd, correct me if my number is wrong, and is currently stated that there's a minimum of 19 members and a maximum of 29. There are institutional representatives. Examples of institutional representatives are NCCU, Lincoln, the Sheriff's Department or law enforcement, Duke, organizations that don't really have term limits. DHA is an institution. Then there are seats that are specifically county and government, i.e. one seat for a council member from the city or mayor and one for county commissioner or county manager. Then there are the city and the county each have 4 seats that they can appoint that make up a different entity. So persons with lived experience, the business community, the faith community, a nonprofit member might be appointed from those 2 seats. And the HSAC is really kind of your board of directors, your governing board that signs off on the application that goes to HUD and to the state for those collaborative applications. And the reason we've got this group, this advisory committee, is the COC in itself is not a legal entity. So the COC is not able to accept funds into any sort of bank account or sign a legal contract. So you have a lead agency. The lead agency is the city of Durham. So as the lead agency sort of serves in this facilitating piece. We're sort of the middlemen between the continuum of care and the HSAC and trying to connect all the pieces and trying to coordinate all of these things. The easiest way I use to look at it in a very simplistic way is Durham, the Community Development Department as the lead agency is similar to an executive director in a nonprofit organization. The continuum of care members are like the staff of a nonprofit organization, and the HSAC is like the board of directors. So it takes everybody to work together and it takes everybody pulling and doing their roles. So in a very, very simplistic, and it's not a perfect analogy, but it sort of gives you an idea of how lead agency, HSAC, COC all work together. And in those Venn diagrams, you've got people who are part of the COC who are also HSAC members, they're service providers, and on a voting entity where they recuse themselves on different things. So Russ, for example, and when Ryan was on the HSAC, would recuse themselves when votes came up that impacted housing for New Hope or families moving forward. So you have these intersecting pieces. The city, in addition to our lead agency role, where we're sort of coordinating this, the city is the recipient of federal funds for ESG, CDBG, and HOPWA, where those funds come directly to the city. And the city in that role could elect to do whatever they wanted with those funds. The city has historically run those funds and solicited input through the continuum of care, through the HSAC and the Performance Management Committee on scoring applications on using ESG and the public service dollars that we put into the homeless system of CDBG funds. So the city has a little bit of autonomy on this. A lot of the role that we have to do and a lot of the things that we do in the homeless system are really dictated by HUD regulations. And it's one of those things that every jurisdiction I've looked at, the amount of money HUD puts into a system usually is a small percentage of the overall amount of money that's taking care of the system. However, they carry an outsized weight in controlling how and what happens within that system. Within the HSAC, we do have committees. There's an executive committee, which is made up of elected HSAC officers, the chair, vice chair, and secretary, as well as the chair of the Policy and Planning Committee and the Performance Management Committee. We have a Policy and Planning Committee, which according to the governance documents, 2/3 of the committee must be made up of HSAC members and 1/3 are COC liaisons who are appointed by the executive committee based on nominations. And the same with the Performance Management Committee. And those committees make recommendations. A lot of the work that's done on what do we do, how do we solve these problems, happen in those Policy and Planning and Performance Management Committees. Scorecards, how do we evaluate projects, comes out of Performance Management. Policy and Planning Committee, we just spent, you'll hear from Sharita in a little bit, we just spent the bulk of our last meeting talking about how do we solve a white flag problem. Now, how do I get involved? Because this seems like there's a lot of ways that people are excluded, and that's not what we want to intend. We need providers, we need help. We can't do this by ourselves and we can't work in a vacuum. But by the same token, we have some governance documents that we need to stay in compliance with and ensure that we follow those. So our HSAC and our committee meetings, all of these are public meetings. Everybody is welcome to attend and we encourage you to attend. Those agendas will have a variety of things to be talked about and worked through. Some of those items are only available to be discussed amongst committee members. Today, we had a full HSAC and full COC meeting with an open discussion in this meeting where everybody was able to discuss things. There's other meetings where the topic is something specific, and if people want to talk, are supposed to go through a public comment period unless the chair or others open it up for full discussion in the room, which could be done on that particular topic. If you're not sure what to do, there's always a way to sign up for public comment and put those links in here. And if coming to an HSAC member, making a public comment is not something that you feel comfortable doing, or coming to one of the committee meetings and making a public comment isn't something you're comfortable doing, any ideas, concerns, thoughts can absolutely be emailed to Durham Opening Doors at durhamnc.gov. And then that feedback would be brought to probably the executive committee to be discussed to figure out where does it fit within the overarching organizational structure of the HSAC, the COC, the lead agency, and the committees. And is this something that needs to be done right now? Is it something that's currently being worked on? Or is it something that it's a great idea and we need to get to it and we need to put it on either a separate committee, or it needs to be tabled for a little bit due to other high need priorities? So that's just us in a nutshell. And just wanted to give kind of a quick piece of sort of who's who and who does what and how, and open to any short questions. I don't want to take up too much time because Sharita's got a white flag update and we've got a few other agenda items.
Any questions for Colin? Yeah, I appreciate that. And as Colin pointed out, the committees do a lot of work. Oh, sorry, Angela, were you going to ask a question?
Can he send that out?
Yes, we'll send it. Yes, we'll send it out to the full HSAC and COC after the meeting.
Good, thank you. So as Colin mentioned, and we're at 4:20, so we're trying to still push by 4:30 if possible. Colin mentioned, a lot of times the committees do a lot of the nitty-gritty work on the ground, and great example is Planning and Policy spent more than 90 minutes talking about white flag the other day, and so we're going to invite Sharita now to come give us, kind of take it back up to a 5,000 to 10,000 foot level, and give us a briefing on what they discussed and next steps out of that in-depth discussion. Sharita.
Hello, everybody. I'm gonna be brief. And if you have any questions, feel free to ask the questions. And between myself and Colin, we'll try to get them answered. We had a very robust conversation, the majority of our meeting. We probably could have continued to speak on it, but people had to go. And so what we decided was that where we recognize that we need to have some long-term planning for the future on this, we needed to address our immediate numbers. So I think, Colin, it was 25 families and 101 singles was our count last meeting.
24 and, yep, 24 and 101, yep.
And so I just want to thank a lot of our community providers that are already doing this work for being present at that meeting. And so our tentative plan right now is that we're exploring funding to add 5 more white flag rooms to the current room roster that Open Table Ministry is doing with our white flag shelter space, our white flag non-congregate shelter space. Also doing white flag, UMD, and Families Moving Forward, we're opening up some available additional space. So UMD, it was 12 spaces, and Families Moving Forward was 3 additional families. And so we're hoping to be able to propose or explore funding to keep those 12 and 3 units between UMD, spaces between UMD and Families Moving Forward more permanent now to serve families through the entire winter season. Our letter that we voted on our last meeting was not submitted following that meeting because it was decided that we needed to go to the city and county governments with a dollar ask. And so the plan is by the end of the week, hopefully, all of our projects that I just mentioned will be submitting their funding budgets to be able to do what we're proposing, and that will turn into a request to city and county government. So that's what we are. I want to thank everybody for their hard work. I'm very happy that we could bring you guys so quickly a response to our current need.
Any questions for Sharita? Well, thanks to Sharita and the committee. They did a lot of work and really dug in to look at all the options. We appreciate that work. Our next 2 items, I think we just cut and paste onto every agenda. A call for new standing members of the committees from the HSAC. And as Colin pointed out, those committees are structured in such a way, this goes back to the changes we made maybe 3.5 years ago now in the structure of the HSAC. Require 2/3 of the membership of the group needs to be HSAC members. And then as there are more HSAC members, it opens up opportunities for more community members to be COC members, to be part of it. Right now, there is a need for another policy and planning liaison from within the COC community. But there are always opportunities for folks who are members of the HSAC to join the committees. And they're always open meetings. So just would share that as an ongoing reminder. Any announcements that we need to make today while we're together? Go ahead, Ryan, I think.
Russ, Lloyd might be able to speak to this, but we've got the homeless memorial coming up next week on, I believe it's the 21st at Durham Central Park, starting at 6 o'clock. I just want to encourage folks to come. It's a very powerful service. I think, it really should remind us of why we do this work. And to me, it also reminds us of why it's important to have a housing first lens. And Lloyd, do you want to say anything?
I put a little more information in the chat that people can read if they have access. Briefly, we had 10 people died homeless in Durham this year, and an additional 17 will remember gratefully were housed but had been recently homeless prior to entering into housing. We'll gather to remember all of them. Thank you.
Lloyd, we recently lost one person.
I got a note about the person who died overnight, so a woman who died in her car, I believe. Yes.
No, she had slept in her car the night before. Well, she had previously been sleeping in her car, but that next day she went to her son's house and it was because she wasn't
Doctor.
feeling well. Mhm.
Okay, thank you.
And DCIA, Durham Congregation Action, does a lot of the planning and things for that. And if it's like past years, they do stream it on the DCIA Facebook page, but it's really a moving thing for people to be able to be there together and remember those who have passed from within the special community. I'll go ahead and share PIC counts coming up on January 25th. Housing for New Hope, as the Unsheltered Coordinating Agency, is taking up more leadership for that this year, working alongside Lloyd very closely. So if you have been a past team lead, you probably received an email invite today, or it's coming very soon, asking for your participation, and there'll be more emails going out soon regarding participation. But it's a great opportunity really to see some of the challenging circumstances that people are facing in the community, but even much more importantly, just to be able to count those who are experiencing homelessness in our community. And that those numbers are very important in our overall work. We see them, I feel like every meeting, or at least every other meeting in some way, the PIT count numbers, and it helps us have a barometer of how we're doing as a community and where we need to focus. So you'll be seeing announcements come out about that again in, over the next few weeks. Invite you to prioritize that if possible. Join us on the evening of January 25th. Any other announcements today? Yes, ma'am. Angela?
Are they meeting back at the ballpark for the pit count?
We are in conversation about a new location. So we are working on that diligently as we speak. And I believe Commissioner Carter, are you trying to make an announcement?
It's not an announcement. I'm sorry. I should have said something earlier. I've just been lost in my own thoughts, trying to wrap my head around some of the issues that we've discussed today, all the needs, the numbers being greater than the capacity of our system to meet those needs. Just in particular, the whole conversation we had at the policy and planning meeting about the fact that there are 140, identified people who are experiencing unsheltered homelessness, but we were only able to come up with a solution that could help 20 more. Certainly a step in the right direction. I do think that, I feel like at some point we need to figure out, until we have a system that can, serve the needs of our community, and until we have a homeless system that can, has the capacity to provide a shelter of some sort for every person who needs it, we still need, and we're going to continue to work towards that, but we still need emergency solutions for those who are unsheltered on cold nights. And I know we don't have time to talk about that now, but it just felt a little bit like 20, is what we've come up with of how to solve the white flag situation. And we're not satisfied with that as a HSAC, I'm sure, and as a community. And it seems like there could be a reasonably quick emergency fund established or something like that could help provide shelter for a family who has encountered a night where there is nowhere else for them to go, especially thinking about children and families. So I didn't want this meeting to end without saying that, and we perhaps can discuss it more offline.
Certainly, and I appreciate that. I think we all appreciate that. I mean, it's such a concerning piece for so many of us, and that you speak to the very issue I think many of us are trying to sort through. Is there's about 15 things that all need to be priority 10, and figuring out how to do those to help the most people is such a challenging piece. And yes, I appreciate the reminder that so much of the earlier conversation was around supportive housing, and how do we balance for the needs of those who are earlier in their journey towards stable housing. Yes, absolutely. Thank you. Thank you for that. Is a very good way to go ahead.
No, that's all. Thanks.
I was just going to say that's a great way to end a meeting and a great reminder. Appreciate that, Commissioner Carter. Unless there is something else to discuss today, I would entertain a motion to adjourn the meeting.
I'll make a motion to adjourn the meeting.
Okay, Angela, do we have a second? Okay, very good. All in favor? can click leave, I guess. Appreciate your patience with me today and for a great conversation. Thank you all.